is the November 30th, 2022 meeting of the Zoning Bylaw Committee. We can start with a roll call alphabetical attendance, starting with Clark.
Clark Brewer here.
Tom Callahan here.
David Farag here.
Okay, and we also have Cassandra Thayer with us, and Judge Judith Cutler is with us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Cassie's coming in right now.
Cassie's coming.
Yeah, I'm just driving, you guys.
Oh, well,
Be safe.
careful. Yeah, be careful.
It's raining.
All right, Cassie's here, and then Jack will join us when he joins us. All right, there's going to be some changes in the way we deal with the agenda, but let's start with item 2, which is the forum. Clark, I saw that you got your materials. I haven't looked at them yet, but Cassandra, can you tell us where we are in the forum and preparation and who's presenting and all that?
Yeah, so we were able to meet with MAPC and everything is going smoothly with them. The representative that they have that is going to be talking specifically about climate and resiliency, she may be attending virtually, but Justin said that that's not going to be an issue. The slideshow is in good shape. The only thing, Clark, is I was going to ask you if the materials that you sent, I'm just not really sure like what you're pulling from those documents, because some of them are 144 pages long.
Yeah.
So if you could just guide me
Clark,
to like,
Clark, we have a rule against
anything?
144 page documents.
Well, I knew that I could fit that in the 10 or 15 minutes that you've allotted for me. So
excellent.
I'm very quick. That's a split second per slide.
So
No,
if
I'm
you could
planning to
just,
consolidate those and put them into like a single PDF by topic, so we can cover everything without getting too distracted. But you know, so I'll send over a combination version.
okay.
All right. So let me get back to what the program is. So is Tom Bell from Concom still speaking about the science of climate change? And
Yes, and he has sent his slides over.
okay, and hopefully somewhat cohesive, specific about what the okay, good. And then the MAPC person is going to speak to more of the bylaw angle of it, and maybe the whatever bylaw they developed with Audubon and blah blah blah.
Yep.
Okay. And Clark, in 5 seconds, what is it that you're going to touch on?
Well, it's basically sustainability, low impact development, but I'm also going to go through the Energy Star and Lead for Homes programs and talk about how we can modify the zoning bylaws to accommodate those more easily.
Okay. All right. I am probably not going to do anything on land alteration or existing land. If I do, it would be real brief, maybe to just take a straw poll of people if they'd like the current version with exemptions. You know, we have too many exemptions, or go back to the original version, which is to cover every lot. But you know, we haven't had a lot of history with it yet, so there isn't really too much to say from practical experience. But you know, if I do that, it'll be real quick, and at the end, and I'll put something together for that.
Okay. So do you want to have just like a placeholder slide or two, just in case you want to talk about it?
Don't even put it on the thing that it might be a topic of discussion. So because you know, you know, again, we may not change a thing about the bylaw, but I think what everybody else is speaking about is really the kind of new material we'd be looking at down the road. So, all right. So, and I guess the publicity is all there and people can access things. And
Yes, Justin started rolling out the publicity stuff today. It is up on the website, and I know that he's thrown together a flyer. I don't know how many physical flyers he's put out and about, but I can touch base with him tomorrow about that. But other than that, it's, you know, same publicity as before. We'll update boards that may be interested in attending. Clark, can you just send me whatever PDF you have by Friday?
Sure,
That way I can plug it in Monday morning.
Okay.
that sounds good.
And this is going to be Monday night. So, and then town meeting is the 12th.
Yes.
Okay. And Judge Cutler, I don't know if you guys at KP have any experience with any new climate bylaws. You know, Hingham's had a study committee now for two years at least, maybe 3. They're working on something. They're cooking something up, but
I haven't yet. At this point. I don't know. Any
yeah, MAPC said they developed one with Audubon, and you know, hopefully they may have that to talk about, at least show us the highlights of it. But this is all new territory for everybody. So at some point, we probably may want to reach out to Hingham and pick their brains about what, because they seem to be a little further along that particular issue than we are. So, all right. Thank you. And we'll see everybody on the 5th, and hopefully we won't have any Zoom issues like last time. Make sure
Yes.
that stupid piece of equipment is
Well,
updated.
Clark's 140-page thing might
Yeah.
crash the whole system. So I
Yeah.
don't know. It might be.
You can't crash the system. So
Yeah, we're planning on getting there very early to do like a trial run. That way, if there is an issue, we have plenty of time to deal with it.
Yeah, what time do you want us to help set up and stuff like that?
I would say honestly no earlier than 6:30. You could stroll in because it starts at 7, and
Okay.
most of the setup is going to be already done. So
All right, just in case you need some help with something else, and
sure.
and we're there with plenty of extra time.
last time, Judge Cutler, the piece of equipment that conveys everybody on Zoom was doing an update.
Of course.
Yeah, the
Software
hardware
update.
hardware update. They decided to schedule it for 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night, and without us knowing about it. So we had a 20-minute lag time on that. But all right, that'll be good. And then as far as forums go, we talked about one in February to give a preview of what the Springtown meeting articles would be, but as far as tonight goes, there's going to be possibly there's a change in what those articles may look like. So if we think we need one on another substantive topic in January, based on what we now might do for Springtown meeting, we can fit one in somewhere. But we are going to stick to the schedule of at least one forum on the articles. March is probably when we will do the planning board hearing. And by the way, the planning board members, Clark and I, we are going to get an updated training from Carolyn in one of our January meetings on how to do the Chapter 5, Section 5 process. So anyway, all right, so let's get to the articles. So everybody has probably seen the email from Judge Cutler from last week. I will be very frank with everybody that I wasn't happy when I first saw it. I've had discussions with Chris Sr. yesterday and with a long one with Judge Cutler this afternoon. I think we have cleared the air. I think I understand better what's being proposed and why. And if Judge Cutler will correct me if I'm wrong, what we had been proposing was starting with reorganizing the bylaw and proposing in the spring some other housekeeping changes and some substantive changes, because we were going to deal with definitions and with uses. Then the heavy substantive changes would have been in the fall. If I'm correctly understanding, and I think, when we talked this afternoon, we came to this understanding that what Judge Cutler is proposing is sort of a reverse, where we still deal with some low-hanging fruit in the spring, doing a lot of our housekeeping that we need to do within the current bylaws organizational structure. And then the second step, a second town meeting would be that, again, the heavy duty substantive stuff. In this first step, there might be some substantive issues that we up to this point hadn't discussed, but would be bringing forward in the spring. And then step 3, and again, whether we may disagree on whether we need a third town meeting. I really, really do not want to see this go into 2024. But the reorganization, if we do it, if we go to the proposal of a Concord model of 9 or 10 articles versus the 20 something we have now, that would be the last step. Make all the changes we want to make, the housekeeping changes that we need, that the diagnostic has pointed out, substantive changes we want to make to the tables, the use table, the dimensional table, new initiatives regarding climate and low impact development. And then at the end of it, the last article to whatever town meeting we present it to is, oh, and by the way, we're going to reorganize it into this format, to this chapter, article, section format. So it's just kind of the reverse of reorganize at the end after you've made all the changes, right? And reorganize and then fit all the changes into that new organization. I don't have a problem with that. I think after hearing Judge Cutler's explanation today, I'm okay with that. So I just, again, I'm somewhat adamant about not trying to get this into 2024 and getting this done in 2023. And maybe that means 3 town meetings, but maybe it means an extra special town meeting somewhere during the course of 2023. Part of that, I think Judge Cutler is correctly pointing out that the appetite for town meeting to take it on. Town meeting in the past has done with the bylaw all at least at once in 1955. They've dealt with other substantial changes.
Those were the old days.
Yeah, but we all know that there's a certain segment of the population that's going to come for one issue, not be completely well informed about this issue. And it may be a lot for people to bite off, which is why we've always thought about 2. And actually, the bylaw working group originally thought 3, but we lost this town meeting for various reasons to bring anything forward. So, so with that, I mean, tonight, so in this framework that Judge Cutler is proposing is that we will go forward to both tonight and at the Springtown meeting with reorganizing Article 1, reorganizing Article 12, reorganizing Article 13, which is essentially to delete Article 13. It's a 2-section article that isn't really necessary. I have it on our agenda that we might get into Article 3, which is the districts. And again, if we do anything with the districts, it's cleaning up what we need to clean up in the existing. And, where my proposal had consolidating the harbor districts and consolidating the 3A commercial districts. We don't necessarily need to deal with that. We'll get into what Judge Cutler is proposing for the spring. Maybe some of that we will do. Maybe some of it we won't. But there's some other things. I'll let her speak in a minute as to what else the other articles she's proposing. I believe she's proposing 9. Is it at the moment?
Some cleanup of 9. No, not 9. 9's the floodplain. That's the bear.
No, 9 articles. I mean, roughly
yes,
9 articles.
If it was 1, sum of 2, which is the definitions, but not. And we can talk about whether or not you want to try full bore or not.
Yeah.
Article 3, which is the zoning districts, just cleaning it up, not new districts. Although removing the reference to the cluster development district, which is not a district on the map. So we'll just sort of that out. Article 4 and 5, I think, are too complex and too interrelated to make it to this town meeting. I mean, if you've got all the brain power and time in the world, you could probably pull it off, but I think it'd be really, really tough.
Yeah.
Article 6 is the sign bylaw. I think it needs some tweaks. I wouldn't go and rewrite it all, but I just would like to see a tweak to emphasize that it is content neutral at all times. And so if somebody wants to put in place of the name of their business, they want to put God saves or, elect whoever, that's up to them, as long as the sign meets the bylaws requirements, with the height and the size and,
And to remind everyone, my proposal didn't have any changes to the sign bylaw or to the parking bylaw, other than the fact that Lauren and I have talked about reaching out to a consultant to make sure our dimensions of our parking spaces and how many we are requiring per use is up to the state of the art. And I think we can pull that together for the spring if we had to.
yeah, I mean, I think, again, because of the way it's written, and you may want to change that. But remember, the uses are very much tied to the uses that are in the use table. And so you want to make sure that they're meshing and nobody's arguing about what parking applies. So that's the only thing, and it's just organizational stuff in the chart and so forth. But so that I wouldn't think you'd be ready to do for this town meeting. Article 8 is the non-conforming uses and structures on lots. I have done a first pass at redrafting that, mostly taking stuff out. There's a lot of language in there that's just basically quoted from the statute, and it really doesn't have to do with anything non-conforming. It's really zoning protections. It says the bylaw doesn't apply to certain lots. So they're not really non-conforming lots. They are conforming as long as they're protected by the freeze. So I don't think that's necessary to be in the bylaw at all. So I would recommend taking it out. And then that particular section doesn't need a lot of tweaking. I might have some questions for you on some of it. I think the big issue, from what I've heard from everyone, from Tom, is the single lot exception. And I tell you, I've been spending a lot of noodling on this issue and whether or not there's a way around it. And I know Tom has a couple of options that I'm going to take a look at. I'm wondering, as I was looking at it again tonight, whether these really are non-conforming lot protections. The lots exist, their usability for building is protected. I'm not sure if we can mess with it too much other than stopping any more from happening, and making sure that these sections apply only to lots, only through lots and zoning amendments through like the end of, the end of 2023 or the end of June of 2023. But somehow we want to make sure we close any loopholes in there so nobody can make new lots that would qualify. And I know Tom told me that there's been some extensive review of the town records to see like how many lots are out there that are sitting out there waiting to be used. I think the biggest issue that I see is when a lot has no frontage at all. Yeah, under that provision of the bylaw, technically can be built on, but how are those people going to gain access to that lot? They're going to have some kind of an easement or something. I mean, how do they get the construction?
Well, yeah, and for the purpose of the committee, my only concern is if we tackle single lot exemption in the spring, given that that is the one issue where in the working group, in all of our public meetings where we actually had public attendance, it was that one. Yeah. Because we toyed with the idea of bringing up a repeal for this fall 21 town meeting.
You can't repeal it.
We just have to have the time to prepare the public for that. So we might suggest for the spring simple housekeeping changes to Article 8, but tackle the single lot exemption in the fall as originally planned.
Yeah.
And after our conversation, I did call Woody Chittick. I was hoping he would be watching tonight, but I did ask him about the history. He's going to dig through some things, not right, he's not going to drop everything right away. But he believes that the current format of Article 8 may well have pre-existed the big change made in 1975. And there's a suspicion of why it was kept or why it was done in the first place. But,
Yeah.
you know, to the extent the history is helpful, we're going to try to dig for it.
Yeah.
And see what we can get. I don't know, Lauren and Cassandra, if we have old versions of the bylaw lying around. I think Woody said there are some somewhere. He may even have some himself, but you know, we're talking back like the original in 55 and then what happened in 69 and 75.
Well, so I would imagine if you're talking about the town meeting action, then we could search those through the town clerk's records.
That's right. We can see the votes from the town
Right.
clerk. Yeah, yeah.
So if you already know years, then certainly we can look that information up.
Well,
Yeah.
we know in 75, I think it was section 6 changed, the state law, and then that's whatever we had for our Article 8, I think carried over. I think what he's suspicion is it pre-existed the state law change, and so, you know, and remember the Orleans one, we learned about that SJC case was, you know, existing in the 60s and repealed in 1970. And I think ours goes back that far as well. But,
Yeah.
you know, we're never going to find out who wrote it and why. But
No, I mean, but you know, as we ran into with the use variance question, sometimes there's a little slip between what's voted by town meeting and what actually continues on in the bylaw. So we just want to make sure that this really did cover all lots, not just residential lots and so forth. I think there would be.
so if we bring it, whenever we bring it forward, we just have to prepare the public for it, because I think the public has a lot of conceptions and misconceptions about what impact a repeal or any change would have on them. So anyway,
on that one, I got a comment.
Yeah.
That would be great if Woody could do some research, because it's my understanding that the town is trying to put online not just old town reports, but also minutes that have gone back. But I don't know how far they're going back with, say, selectmen minutes. So it'd be interesting to see at that time, you know, because the town annual report's just going to say, here's the, you know, the article and they voted for it and that kind of thing like that. But to dig deeper to see, you know, if there was any meetings or anything that discussed it. And I don't know at that time in the 50s if there was what even the town paper was, if there was a Cohasset Mariner or what it was called back then. But that would be something to do a little research on just around that time with the articles of what was being talked about, and if there was anything, because I've only heard, you know, stories or rumors to why it came about, and every person you ask, you get a different story as to how it came about. Yeah. And I think if there was any changes proposed on that to really try and unearth why it's there in the first place would be very important before you know, start to toy with it at all. If we can't, then, you know, so be it. But
right.
All right, so that's deferred. We'll work on it, but it'll be deferred in terms of a positive.
Yeah, that'll be a fall issue if we tackle it. So so let to just and by the way, to look for all the historical stuff, that means staff might have to crawl into the bowels of the basement and the attic, and you know, it is haunted, so just be careful.
That's the fun stuff.
As long as there's no centipedes down there, then we're okay. But otherwise, we might have to ask facilities to pull them for us. So
we'll take volunteers to help you out if anybody wants to go.
I'll tell you, I spent a couple of weeks in the basement of the Situate Town Hall at one point, looking for some background history. And they fortunately had a whole card catalog system index of every town meeting and Board of Selectmen meeting going back to the beginning of the town. And it had been done during the 1930s as one of those work projects, you know, the
WPA.
Yeah, the WPA projects. It was so beautifully done, all handwritten, but just ideal. It was so helpful. So you never know, you might have something like that.
we'll inquire. So we'll do some research on those items and circle back to you.
Okay.
All right. So
that leaves us with some of two, as far as I know, but we can discuss that. 3, 6, 8. And did you want to do 11 if we're not making any substantive changes?
well, well, I'll do this. I would put. But I think if we, land alteration is a simple issue. You could either go back to the way it was originally proposed, or we keep the compromise that we have.
Mhm.
And I could present that to everybody in 15 minutes, and we can go yay or nay on that.
Okay.
And the text of how it was originally written is still out there. It's sitting in my computer somewhere, and it probably needs to be tweaked, but you know, we could do that fairly easy. So if everybody understands what's being proposed here, is that we would go forward in the spring with the current format of the bylaw. We'd be making all of the changes we want to make to Articles 1, 6, 12, and possibly 11,
3.
and 3. Well, 3, to the extent we might still do future consolidation or renaming and stuff.
And 8.
We would go forward with changes to 8 other than single lot exemption. And as far as definitions, we would do some of the immediate definitional changes that we need to address, like height. And I would also suggest, I was thinking about this today, you know, whether it's gross floor area ratio, we've debated at different times over the past 2 years, what's included in that definition? Is it garage space, attic space, you know, setting us up for the substantive changes in the table of dimensional regulations, we should probably settle on that.
Right. And do you have,
What's included in floor area ratio? Do it now. So not all the definitions, certainly not all that I proposed. Judge Cutler and I talked about my ideas for the table of uses and definitions that go with it. And there's some happy medium somewhere between the two extremes. You know, our laundry list in Article 4, I think everybody agrees, is ridiculous. So that's what we go forward. And then we also talked about 19 and 20, which is the wind and solar. And particularly the solar KP's diagnostic mentioned some changes that need to be needed. I even think in the wind, we restrict it too much to where wind facilities can be. But I had mentioned to Judge Cutler today that when we were at our little kumbaya last week, I ran into Tanya Bodell of the Alternative Energy Committee. They're the ones who wrote these bylaws. I wanted them to take a look at what's being proposed for change with the diagnostic comments and give us their initial feedback, since they're the ones who wrote the articles in the first place. I just would now have to accelerate them from planning for fall town meeting to spring town meeting, but they're relatively minor. I think, you know, they can, so I'm going to continue to ship that out to them to see, but that's now what we would be looking at. Then our next town meeting, we would be then tackling the table of uses, Article 4, and anything else in Article 4. Any definitional changes that go with that. We'd be taking on Article 5, which is the table of dimensions. And, you know, to that end, looking at the left side of that table, the right side of that table, the bylaw working group did a lot of study about house size and whether we make any changes. I think we're ready for that. We have the data to support if we want to make changes. We don't have the data on changing frontage, setbacks, lot width. Lauren and I have talked about commissioning Weston and Sampson to do a study. I don't want to use any real world example that's coming up in front of the planning board. I'd rather than just take some generic plot of land in town that's undeveloped and give us a scenario what it would look like with this frontage, existing frontage and setbacks and blah, blah, blah. So I'd like to go forward with that. Lauren, I don't know where we are on that, finding money for that and everything, but I think we will, if we are going to go in that direction to changing the frontage back to pre-1969, we need the data to back that up. Then signs, parking, single lot exemption, and perhaps any new initiatives would all be coming on in the fall. And I still think in the 2-town meeting format, then finishing it up with the however we're going to reorganize the sections and articles and stuff. we talked about, and I had circulated materials that between now and the next meeting, we'd talk about, you know, the new unified idea of the code of regulations. Judge Cutler points out that we don't need a warrant article for that. As we are dealing with the rewrites of each of these articles, we can pass regulations that adopts all of that. You know, we, the planning board, can pass regulations to adopt all of those procedural things that we wanted to move into regulations. We can just do that. And then as we amend these different articles, we can take those sections out. We don't have to have a town meeting action to do that. Still got to get buy-in from all the other land use boards that they want a single source compilation of everybody's regulations. But, you know, certainly the planning board and the zoning board can go off on their own if they have to. So we don't really need to talk about that. So for purposes of tonight, I'd like to go through Judge Cutler's proposed changes to Article 1's 12 and 13, maybe into 3 if we don't go too long. I did a comparison document. You know, really, I don't have my comments about 1, 12, and 13 is about consolidating them into one article. It's really not on the substance. So we'll just go with Judge Cutler's proposed rewrite here. And you know, let's try to say we're okay with this, get the article written, be ready to do it. Again, February is our target to have everything ready. February would be our first forum to unveil these to the public. March would be our hearings with the planning board. So we want to keep to that schedule. We're scheduled to meet for the 19th. You know, we may taking it easy for the month of December, but we're going to have to pick up the pace in January and February. So if that's okay with everybody, I'll let Judge Cutler start if you'd like. I don't know if anybody's in a position to share a screen, or do we need to do that? But
That's technologically beyond me, but
What version exactly are we looking at?
well, we're going to be looking solely then at what Judge Cutler is, I guess it's her draft article. Is that
Article 1, version 1. Article 1, version 1, November 9th, 2020. You have that?
Yeah.
I can pull that up. I just have to open my email if you give me a minute.
Okay, all right.
Well, while she's doing that, if I could
Yeah, go
say
ahead.
something before the Springtown meeting, excuse me, of 2023. I've said it a few times, but the design guidelines for 3A and or the village have to be tightened up before we walk to town meeting there, because that is on the forefronts of people's minds. I mean, the project that is next to the Stop and Shop is affectionately known as MCI Cohasset for what it looks like. And everybody is talking about that, about the way it looks, the whole 9 yards. And of course, that design guidelines are aesthetics. But if those aren't tightened up before we come with any kind of housekeeping or whatever, and again, that would be on, I believe, on the planning board level to, you know, regulation wise or whatever, to tighten up. But that needs to be done before we step to town meeting floor, so that people can know that that has been addressed in some way, shape, or form.
Let me just address that for a minute, because it comes up obviously in the planning board with our village project that we have before us, and it came up at the forum that we did on the village, the first of the forums. The guidelines are fairly extensive. I don't know how many pages is it, Lauren, Clark? You guys wrote it. It's
Yeah.
fairly extensive. There was one part of it on being innovative that, you know, got us a modernistic design that nobody likes. You know, maybe that needs to be tweaked. But there was some discussion about strengthening those to the point of a regulation to the extent it makes a difference. And that's something the planning board can do without town meeting action. And we have some holes in our agenda in December and January where we could take that issue up. We could deal with the things we want to move into regulations out of the bylaw, all the procedural and application stuff. And then as a second step, we can we can, if we wish to change the guidelines to regulations, we can do that. Now, what I was going to suggest to the planning board at our next meeting is that somebody on the planning board, one or two of our members, take a look at it and make a thorough review of it, even though they were only passed, they were passed in 2018. They're pretty fresh, and I know Clark, it was before my time, Clark did a lot of work on that. I heard the same sentiment that people, so the guidelines deal with the harbor and the village. They do not deal with 3A. And we
Right.
heard this, we heard the sentiment at that forum that people wanted them extended to 3A. And I have no problem with that, but understanding that, 3A will, probably be a place that's going to be heavy mixed use like the village is. So,
In order to do design guidelines for 3A, we gotta kind of create a vision for what we kind of want it all to be, how it will work and what it would look like.
Yeah.
And with examples of things that we say, oh yeah, we like that instead of what we have now, or whatever it is.
Well, you
Um,
can look at
as a
the TOD district when they next to the T parking lot, when they redid that whole area, which had the Mary Lou's and other stuff there beforehand. That's a multi-use building, and it looks like it fits with the town, and no one's ever complained about that. You have apartments on the second floor. You've got retail on the first floor, including some to-go restaurants, workout center, things like that. And it's a nice building. It fits in the town. But some of the other stuff that's come after, it's definitely not.
Well,
That
you know what,
team did
I have to take issue with people's friggin' opinions about the Stop and Shop. It's not that horrible, but overall, the harbor and village guidelines try to set an overall colonial looking feel to it, with the provision that there can be some innovation that we maybe have to just narrowly define. But yeah, Clark's absolutely right. So I think what we need, and that I'll bring this up to our planning board meeting on the 7th, that we need some members of that committee to take a look at it, what exists, take a look at how it might be extended to 3A. Dave, you could certainly participate with members of the planning board on doing that. And then, the process of passing, we just have to have a public hearing to turn them into regulations, and it's not that difficult to do, but.
Lauren raised her hand.
Yes, I apologize. Yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
So I just wanted to comment that design guidelines are something that we can do at any point with an advertised public hearing. We don't need to revolve around a town meeting cycle. And I just wanted to also remind you that not only do we have a $75,000 town meeting allocation, we also had another $75,000 ARPA allocation for zoning bylaw work. At the time, we were previously planning to do some work with the Stantec consulting firm to do 3A work and also look at the village. We also have an earmark from ARPA funding from a separate state allocation for $50,000 specifically for looking at zoning and doing stuff for the village. So I just want to remind you of these resources that have been allocated for the purpose of zoning, and that, Tom, you mentioned earlier, I wrote down, you were talking about, potentially using a consultant to look at like lot analysis and dimensional changes. We can absolutely do something like that. We can look at someone, have someone work with design guidelines. I agree with what Clark said. We do need to get more of a vision, but these are all things that we can do, and they don't need to revolve around town meeting cycle. So that's the good news. We just need to plan and strategically know what we want to do for all of this so that we can start to ballpark budget and allocate resources, because we do only have a finite amount. But with that said, I'm happy.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. Clark, when the guidelines were done in 2018, did you guys bring in an outside consultant for that? Or did that?
Okay, so this is what happened. We had the guidelines put together when we redid the village bylaw. We just never adopted them. They just sat as like a unadopted guideline that we could give to people who were planning projects. But so we only tweaked it in 2018, tweaked the version that had been done 10 years earlier.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess my question is, would we need an outside expert to help us extend the guidelines to 3A, or is that something we could handle ourselves?
Well, I think it's kind of a different animal.
All right.
So I would, if you don't mind, I would recommend that we do consider an outside consultant. It is a
Yeah.
different
Okay.
animal, but given that that's gonna come at a later date, I would like to get us back on task to talk about Judge Cutler's article, and I do have, it was Article 1 that you wanted me to pull up right now, right?
Yes, please.
Is that
Sorry,
okay?
I was just going on
No,
a
that's
tangent
okay. This
until
is-
you could
No,
pull it
that's all
up.
right. No, but
No,
Dave, that's good.
It's
You-
really
you-
important, and we could go on for a while about this, but I do think
Yeah.
we could dedicate a whole meeting to this at a later
The
time.
good thing is,
Sure.
Dave, you volunteered yourself to a subcommittee with some planning board members to take on this task. But so for outside consultants at the moment, we're looking at analysis of our parking regs, both as to uses and to size of spaces. An analysis of comparative development versus with our current frontage and our old frontage or typical suburban frontage. And now getting somebody to look at extending the guidelines, the design guidelines to 3A. All right, and I'm sure other things where we need outside help will come up.
If I could just interject for 1 minute, I just noticed in your zoning bylaw, it does expressly provide the planning board the power to establish, to adopt regulations establishing additional design guidelines other than what are in the bylaw itself. So to do that to 3A, I think you'd have to get some authority in the zoning bylaw to adopt design guidelines for that district.
Okay,
Okay.
well, let me ask you this, is there guidelines now? Would making them regulations be any more useful to us?
I mean, design, you're applying these guidelines, regulations, or what have you. It depends upon how they're written and how they're applied. If they're very strict regulations, you must have a peaked roof, or you may only have cedar siding or something like that.
Yeah.
That's a little far afield from the kinds of regulations
Okay,
that you would normally have. But if you have those as a guideline, this is what we prefer to see. This is the type of architecture that we want to see. These are the types of materials that we look for. And you're granting a special permit. You're going to look into those design guidelines to justify whether you say yes or no or put conditions on. So they're really supportive of your decision. And ultimately, you can decide something different from the guidelines if you want. It's
Yeah.
just
well, it's the public who's driving, the comments of, we should be very strict about this and have something that can stick, but you try to explain to the public that you never rely on, it's hard to regulate aesthetics, so.
exactly. And you may say something and it may technically meet that requirement, but it's still ugly as anything. You can't make
Right.
sure.
Well,
have-
yeah. The project in the village didn't violate any part of the guidelines. It just was. Cassie, you didn't hear me say what it was. You heard. All right. So
Okay.
Judge Cutler, if you want to take us
Alright,
through this.
So this was a pretty straightforward.
Sorry, I was
thing.
on mute, guys.
No, well, it's all changed. It's all good now. It's clean building.
I just went ahead and drafted a warrant article for this, just because the changes were so basic and straightforward. And I took the board's comments or the committee's comments that I had received, and wherever you said yes, go ahead, I did it. There's a couple of areas. So we're changing the title of the whole chapter to Town of Cohasset zoning bylaw. We're just changing some headings to reflect more of what the content of that section is, and renumbering some sections accordingly. You'll see I've outlined in yellow under the purposes section. We were adding the purposes of conserving natural resources and preventing pollution of the environment and encouraging the most appropriate use of land. What I didn't understand the committee's comments on the idea of encouraging diverse housing opportunities. That is a possibility, but if you don't want that in there, you don't have to have it in there. If you have other purposes you want to add, that's a change to the bylaw, but it's a substantive change to the bylaw. I don't know if it'll engender any kind of discussion. It could be to combat climate change or whatever. I mean, those are all appropriate zoning purposes.
Goals, yeah.
I think we might want to just maybe add to this with a future amendment as we bring any new substantive bylaw forward, perhaps. I don't have a problem with leaving H in, and again, surprisingly, at the second forum, nobody got up and said, no, we shouldn't be doing multifamily housing in Cohasset. There was no strong opposition to any of it. So
And our
think
housing
people-
production plan does point to diversifying housing, so it is
Yeah.
something that the town has endorsed.
So you want to
Okay.
leave that?
Yep.
Okay. The repeal or an effective date, as I mentioned in the diagnosis, it was really not necessary. And I was rewriting the basic requirements. And so this is what you have here in 300.1.3 and 1.4 is essentially what you do now, but it's just written in a different way. And then severability is a brand new section. And just, you have some severability clauses elsewhere in the bylaw, but this just makes clear if any one of these provisions is determined invalid, that doesn't necessarily affect anything else. Now, it might, just as a matter of law, because of the way it's construed by the court, but that's the intent, is that everything stands on its own validity wise. And then we don't need the application section. And I would add here one more subsection of G, which would be to delete Article 13 in its entirety. As Tom mentioned, those two provisions are not necessary anymore, and they don't help us at all. So that would be, so this would be, to my way of thinking, this should pass without any discussion. I don't know. You never know who's going to have a beef, but I thought it was
Yeah.
fun.
So my only other thought that was in my draft was, I don't know if we mentioned it somewhere else in the bylaw, but the authority to assess fees.
The authority to assess fees would probably be in the administration section.
Okay, all right.
But that's something I want to look at a little more carefully. I think that may be a separate town meeting, that may be a general bylaw, I'm not sure. But if you're talking about consultant fees, we probably should have that in there, definitely. But in terms of an application fees, you certainly have the power to do that, and it does authorize in the bylaw when you're adopting these regulations for administration of various special permits and so forth. You have the power to require fees. So that's not necessarily something that needs to be called out individually. I think the consultant fee part might be something you want to add in
In this article.
It wouldn't be in Article 1, it would be in the administration and
Oh,
enforcement.
okay, all right, fine.
Yeah.
All right, anyone have any comments? This is kind of short and sweet, Article 1. So anyone have any comments, thoughts,
Or concerns.
concerns?
Looks good.
All
Yeah,
right,
no
then
concerns.
I'd entertain a motion that we adopt that and authorize Judge Cutler to finalize the necessary warrant article for it. Somebody want to make that motion?
moved.
All right, second someone?
I'll second.
That puts that one
All right,
away.
all
we
in
gotta-
favor, alphabetical roll call.
Mark Brewer, aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
David Farag, aye.
Cass Malatesta, aye.
All right. All right, so next we'll look at, take your time, if we can pull up
This
Judge
is
Cutler's
this is a little more complicated.
Article 12. So the existing Article 12, for everybody's background, is where the building inspector is discussed, enforcement is discussed. The processes of special permits, variances are discussed. The powers of the zoning board are discussed. So, again, we'll discuss in the future whether it belongs in Article 12 or somewhere else, but let's just deal with the substance of it. And starting with 12.1, which is this part about the building inspector and the enforcement, which I personally have always thought has been an incomprehensible mess, but and by the way, I don't know if you, I think you did put it in that our fines for a violation is at present just $100 a day. Some of the other boards in town have 300. 300 is the maximum under state law, and I see that we're going to do that, and I think we should.
Yeah.
All right, but if Judge Cutler, if you could take us through this, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, what I tried to do with this, it's not that too many things were wrong with it fundamentally. However, I wanted to make sure that it was written in a way that was consistent with state law and couldn't be confused. And so a lot of this is clarification. I wanted to emphasize that the zoning bylaw, when we say enforcement of the zoning bylaw, we're talking about also if there are terms and conditions of variances or special permits or other decisions under the bylaw, that's included in the power to enforce the bylaw. So that's what we're talking about with enforcement. We all, it already said that a structure, well, maybe this is a question for you too. No building or structures. A building is a structure and it's defined as a structure. Structure includes building. So we either use the phrase no building or other structure all the time, or we say no structure. How say you?
Well, I get in the definitions, and I can't recall what we have now versus what I wrote, but I know it's defining structure. I think our current definitions define structure. Not so sure it defines building, or if it maybe it says
any structure or portion thereof having a roof. So it includes building.
So this conflict comes up from time to time. The building code, the Massachusetts building code, does have some exclusions for building permits.
Well, that is excluding tents and vehicles and so forth.
Well, I think it excludes sheds up to a certain size, but our bylaw doesn't have those exclusions.
That's correct.
And that's where I think that mistakes or something like that has been made, because certainly the goal is to abide by the requirements of whatever regulations there are, the most restrictive or all of them. And I use the example of the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board has a set of regulations, and so does the American with Disabilities Act has a certain set of regulations. And as an architect, we have to comply with both. And it's kind of a pain. It'd be nice if they were exactly the same, but they aren't. So there, where our bylaw, we could say all sheds, buildings, or structures, because there are some miscellaneous things that count as structures but don't count as buildings.
Well, again, because the bylaw is defining what a structure is, the building code definition doesn't apply.
Right.
That would apply only if we didn't define structure.
Well,
Right.
let me suggest this. First, my thought is, as we go forward in rewriting this bylaw, anything that is a defined term in our bylaw should be capitalized throughout the bylaw.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so we can look at the substance of this right now, and then when we get to definitions, settling on the distinctions between building, structure, and whatever, we know that's a definitional change we have to deal with at this town meeting, and just settle it once and for all. And then if we if we define structure in a way we want it, then we go back to the rest of the bylaw and capitalize it as a term. And
Well, yeah, I agree with you.
I don't know that do we have to settle on the definition first before we?
No, I think your
we do this?
definitions are fine. My only point is if you define structure as including building, is it necessary to say no building or structure?
No.
Or
No.
just say no structure? And then,
Correct.
right,
Correct.
okay, so why don't we do that as a convention,
Right.
unless we really mean building and not other structures, like, a flagpole or whatever.
And then, and then obviously we just gotta make sure that's consistent. Any other place the word building appears in the bylaw.
Right, I've been trying to do that.
Yeah, no, somebody, I'm sure there's people who are good at that stuff, who can sort through a document.
All right, and then the other thing is, I wanted to emphasize that they need to, before it can be constructed or changed, it needs a building permit from the building inspector, and he can't issue a building permit unless it complies, and he can't occupy it unless the building inspector says, yes, here's an occupancy permit, and that occupancy permit has to indicate that the use or occupancy complies. So it's kind of a fail-safe review. Now, if something doesn't require a building permit, it's another story, but it still has to comply with the bylaw. This just emphasizes that the building inspector can on his own or with a written enforcement investigate and take actions necessary, and that violations are punishable. And anybody aggrieved can go to the ZBA. I took out a lot of the details about how that enforcement process is done. So about when the written complaint is, that's all in the statute. So I don't think you need to have that.
Yeah, see, and then my version, though, it spelled that out maybe too simplistically, but again, thinking of the average citizen understanding this, all of us here can be referred to a state statute and know where to go find it. I don't, it's a matter of approach of how easy to read we want to make this whole thing.
Well, if we do want to state the requirements of the statute, then I think we need to quote them, because I don't want to paraphrase them. That could also lead someone down the wrong path.
Which I did. I paraphrased quite a bit.
I mean, one of the things you can do, Tom, is have sort of a guide for the citizen. How
Yeah.
do I take an appeal?
Yeah.
What do I, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, and then I had suggested that for having a new chart in the bylaw for timelines. We could probably do that for this process as well, but I don't know that we need to, that can come later at the organization.
Right. I just would point out that some of the language in the Mass General laws isn't necessarily approachable by the lay people as well.
Right.
So
Right.
I think Judge Cutler, your suggestion of a guideline in this case is perfect.
Yeah, usually, like everything you ever wanted to know on how to, deal with the town zoning bylaw or something.
Yeah, correct. We can do that.
Especially in areas where people have expressed that they don't understand, or there's seems like there's a conflict that because they don't understand or whatever it is.
Right. And if you sort of misquote or misstate what the statutory requirement is, or the statute later gets amended and you don't catch up with your bylaw, you've got a little bit of a problem for people.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Good idea. We'll work on that. That sounds like a planning board subcommittee.
Sounds like another one of Tom's weekends.
And so we sort of had the same problem with the zoning board of appeals section. I tried to take out some of the extra language and just this is, I don't know, I think there's a version that's cleaned up too. I don't know if we need to.
Did you put in it? Oh yeah, you did. So there is a section about the planning board. The planning board is described
We have the planning board in here. Now, I did not, I know, Tom, you wanted to define the planning board. I was going to suggest we put a definition of planning board in the definition section, along with a definition of special permit granting authority and zoning board.
I just thought, the planning board is described in one of the general bylaws describing each board, but I just thought it was like a
I can-
curious omission that the planning board is not mentioned in the actual zoning bylaw.
It should be.
Yeah, so no, that's fine. What you've written is fine. I'm glad that it's in, that's all.
Okay.
Sorry, I put it on simple view mode and now we are on the wrong page. Okay, let's get back to where we were.
Now,
Okay. So then the planning board, we just put in what the powers are under the bylaw. And then here we have a specific provision that provides that the zoning board and the planning board will adopt and from time to time amend their rules and regulations regarding their respective powers and duties. That sort of covers your special permits and the site plan approval, and requiring the copy filed with the town clerk. And I kind of rearranged the special permit provisions and separated out when the bylaw authorizes the zoning board of appeals or the planning board. You have to look at who the designated special permit granting authority is. So in each section that'll be designated. And then we have the findings, pretty much. I didn't really change the
Yeah,
findings.
in the sections on the special permits and the variances and site plan review, is the application and process stuff out?
Now, yes, it says,
Yeah,
let's see.
so we will have to pass a regulation simultaneous with this and get that into our regs so that we have it. Okay. I
Yes,
just
and
want-
it does require that actually above with the special permits.
Right.
There is a provision for that if I can find it.
And here somewhere we'd work in the fee thing that we discussed.
Yeah, I'm just looking, so under, for example. Well, the 12.4 is the administrative rules. They shall from time to time adopt and amend rules relative to the administration of the respective powers, describing the procedures for submission and approval, the required size, form, contents, style, and numbers of copies to be submitted. So that covers all of that. And so I don't mention regulations under special permits particularly. I do under site plan specify that the planning board must adopt the rules and regulations under that.
Okay.
But we took out the details of what's included in the regulations. Let's see. Oh, I sort of changed around. I would like you to, when you have some time, to take a look at E and D of 12.4 on the special permits. This has to do with transferring the copies of the application to the other boards and allowing, and that you can't act until those 35 days is elapsed. I've rewritten it somewhat, and I'd like you to take a look at it to make sure it still works for you. I think it's essentially what was there.
Yeah, how many times do we actually do that in practice?
Well, we do it we do it in our office.
Internally, we do it, right? You guys are all sharing and talking and meeting all of these requirements. But,
Right.
Yeah.
all right,
All
yeah,
right.
that looks fine, I think. So,
Now, the variance one is quite a bit different from, I think, the way it's written now, and I tried to clean up the mess about the use variances.
Yep.
So what I've said at the very beginning of that is that the zoning board of appeals has the power to grant a variance from applicable terms of the zoning bylaw, including use regulations with respect to particular land or structures. So that's sort of covered in the powers of
okay.
the board to grant variances. And
So this essentially, I believe isn't it in Article 4 now? Isn't that where it got?
yeah, and it's
slapped
got,
in?
it's sort of, that may be something when we amend Article 12, we might have to delete that sentence from Article 4 because it is contrary to what town meeting adopted. I'm not even sure if we have to have further town meeting, the town meeting, like, we'll have to take a look at exactly what the town meeting did.
Well,
But
yeah, it just, yeah.
Yeah.
So passage of this article may require like a step 2 is,
Yeah.
And repeal this
include
sentence.
part 2, right? Include repeal of Article 4.
So this is quite interesting, I'd say. You're
Mhm.
referring to the Mass General Law, which is slightly different than what we put in our.
Yes.
We have a condition that must be met is, are unique, that the lot or
Oh,
land
no,
has
that's
to
in the
be,
general laws.
You-
That's in the general laws. It must be unique.
well, the Mass General Law used a slightly different term for the conditions, or condition one, then are unique. Our bylaw said are unique. And I think that's the operative, that part that has not allowed the zoning bylaw to grant variances in such a long time. I had both of them kicking around here.
you have
somewhere.
to
We don't grant a lot of variances like other towns because we have a zoning board that understands how rare they're supposed to be.
Well, I'm not sure, but what we have is a slightly more
Yeah,
intense
unfortunately,
condition.
you have to make this finding in order to grant a variance. So you have to find, and there's case law like for eons about what
Lots of
the
it.
board has to make findings and support factual findings that show that it's the circumstances relating to the soil conditions, etc., and especially affecting such land or structure, but not the general zoning district. That's your uniqueness.
Right, right.
Okay.
That's another way of saying the same thing, just less,
Right.
less specific or less intense. It's, it
Well, I mean, you can
it
interpret
implies, it implies unique, and in other communities, they've used grasp the term hardship. You must have
Well,
a
hardship, yeah,
demonstrated
it says it has to
hardship.
involve, it has to involve substantial hardship, financial or otherwise, to the
Yeah.
petitioner.
But that stuff is in the Mass General Law.
Right, and this is what it's saying. This is how you can grant a
You
variance.
got it
You have
here
that
too.
power.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have the power to grant the variance where you find this. All right, you can't make up other findings in order, you can deny it because the property is, the problem is not unique, and that can be your statement. And therefore, you don't meet the standards. But I would not restate the standards that are in the statute. They're pretty strictly enforced. That's, I mean, obviously, the board knows, what you mean. You know that it's got to be unique. Right? And that's what this says. And again, this is a kind of thing that you can lay out in more layman's terms for the benefit of anybody who's applying. For
Right.
example, in your
An
regulations.
explanation.
Yeah, in your regulations, you could say, explain how your circumstances are unique to your property. You can do that.
Yeah.
But the finding is statutory.
So just one question, and the change, are we an outlier or no longer an outlier?
You're no longer an outlier.
Okay, because one of the main objectives since the working group was formed was to
Yeah.
take out of this bylaw everything that makes us an outlier.
Yeah, yeah. And you want to be consistent with state law, right?
Correct, right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that helps, that helps.
Right.
All right.
Okay. B just sort of clarifies that someone can get an extension of time, that the variance has to be exercised within 1 year or it lapses, and it can't be reestablished unless there's another hearing and under section 10. And however, it gives the variance holder the opportunity to get an extension prior to the end of the 1 year period from the Board of Appeals. So site plan review, I made some changes to this, although it's very confusing to me as to how it really applies. The way it's written, it only applies to a structure that exceeds a total gross floor area of 200 square feet, right?
Mhm.
Or to a building or structure that's non-conforming in terms of what uses it has. It's a very limited site plan review. And I'm wondering, for the future, is that really what you want? Or do you want to have the opportunity to look at any new non-residential construction of a certain size or certain kinds of,
Well, why don't we just say may not issue any permits for construction, reconstruction, expansion of any structure is going to be the term in any commercial district.
you could do
period.
that. You could do that.
Period.
You could do that, but then, you know, then you have the issue of, well, I'm only putting in one little parking space on the side of the building, or I'm only putting in a trash container in the back, and then, you know,
If
do you
two-
really
if-
want to be inundated with that?
Well, if 200 square feet is a fair cutoff, then keep
Mhm.
that, but.
Well,
Mhm.
200 square feet, I mean, you know, if somebody was doing, I mean, 200 square feet is a very small internal renovation. We haven't been in, you know, in the last 10 years, we haven't been looking at renovated commercial space in business or light industry. You know, unless it's thousands of square feet, not 200. So in practice, those 200 square feet has been ignored.
So can I just comment on that actually?
Yep, sorry, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
The 200 square feet as it's been applied has been to exterior renovation of commercial space. Any commercial space that's been interior, like redesigned, and you see new businesses coming in and retrofitting,
Yeah.
that's not falling under site plan review because that's not what the planning board has the purview to regulate. It's really, you're looking at the outside of the structure, what the traffic generation impact is. So that's why you haven't seen it. If you're thinking of, you know, for example, some of the businesses along the 3A corridor, you
Yeah,
could have seen
right.
turnover. If it was just interior, you wouldn't have seen that.
Mhm.
But I
We
think
have-
the term reconstruction would be, it would make those applicable. I mean, it doesn't say only exterior changes or
All right,
improvements,
well,
it says reconstruction.
Well, but the thing, I mean,
Or
what are you trying to
expansion.
regulate is if with those.
All right,
Well, I mean,
so-
I guess the question is
Mhm.
if our practice has been to ignore the reconstruction, um, projects and just the construction or expansion projects over 200 square feet. We should say that if that's practical and that makes
What is,
sense.
can you give an example?
What
Because
is
I,
reconstruction?
I can't think of an example where it's been ignored.
All right.
Well,
Well,
you know, we can keep going on this. I can give you a dozen examples where I think reconstruction in a business or light industry district would have applied. But
first of
we
all,
don't need to
in this
do we need
first
to do
paragraph,
that now. I just think there's a problem with the word reconstruction
in
here.
the first change in the phrase a business or light industry, let's take that out and just say a commercial, any commercial. Because
Well,
then,
Any, or you might want to say
well,
non-residential.
I get that, but well, again, you know, if we end up consolidating districts in the harbor and on 3A, there won't be a light industry district anymore. So rather than have a
A
future,
non-residential building?
fine, if that's better, but again,
Because then it
I
applies.
think
even to
common
residential
sense knows
districts.
what the difference between commercial and residential is, but however it needs to be worded, just so that we're avoiding a future amendment to this.
Right, I
Now,
will,
with respect to
that's a policy question. When you say commercial, I understand what you mean by commercial, but what about a school that's not a town school or a hospital or, you know?
well, all right, I mean, well, all right.
So that's how broad do you want to
I
go?
know, and
We
yes,
should look at fundamentally what the purpose of this is for the town and by statute.
If you want to leave it for now and just tweak it, I just want to
Yeah, I
mention.
get it, but what about,
Right,
for the
I
other
feel-
issue? For the
I-
other issue, is the word external in front of construction, reconstruction, or expansion, will that solve Clark's issue?
Sure it would.
Okay. And Lauren, is there a problem with that, you think, from your or John's perspective?
Can you repeat what the word.
So right up in the first
That
line.
may not be the right word, but you're getting at
You
something.
like that?
External.
Right.
Before construction, reconstruction, or, I mean, to distinguish from inside the building. They're moving walls inside the building, we don't care.
Right.
Yeah,
If they're expanding, putting a 200 square foot addition on something, then we care.
Correct.
yeah,
So we
If
should
they're,
just
if
say
they're
that.
putting a drive-through even in an existing wall, we would care for site plan review. You know, so any kind of external change, again, maybe we have, when we get to definitions, we'll define external if we need to, but again.
And
this is
now,
what
like,
we-
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just thinking of a scenario that's happened in the past. Do you want to classify in terms of just physical structure space or also parking area? Because we had like the ATM came in before
Right.
Curtis Liquors.
Yeah.
And it came to the planning board informally as a courtesy because at the time Bob Egan suggested it because he said it didn't really feel right to just stick an ATM in the middle of a commercial plaza. But there was really no trigger to require the planning board to look at it and there was no decision issued. But I mean, if you
Yeah.
think about it, like a drive-through ATM does have an impact. Is that something that
Right,
you
it does
regulate?
have an impact, so,
All right, so let me just say that I attached to this draft a proposed alternative site plan review requirement, which would apply to significant changes in parking areas or structures of a certain size or what have you. You can take a look at it as a kind of way to approach it in the future. But for now, I don't think you want, do you really want to tackle this at town meeting or do you want to reserve it?
no, let's deal with it.
Okay,
We won't vote on it tonight. We'll
I
show
think
us
it's
your
a manageable
alternative
change.
right.
our next meeting at the 19th, but, you know, the purpose of the site plan review is to look at traffic safeties, blah, blah, blah. So any kind of change that would generate a change, like a drive-through might be less than 200 square feet.
Change of the
You put in a
driveway.
drive-through window, and the ATM is a perfect example. That creates a whole different traffic pattern
Exactly.
in that
Yeah.
parking lot.
Yes.
I don't know that it's ever created a nightmare, but it's certainly inconvenient for me. Some of the shortcuts I take through that parking lot.
Anyhow, take a
anyway.
look when you have an opportunity, take a look at the draft and it's very generalized. You can, think
Do
that
we-
this is the way to
Do we
go.
all have, do we all have that?
I think it was attached to this, the same set of documents as the Article 12 amendments.
All right, so everybody on the board, let's look at that and we'll be prepared to vote on this article as the first item of business at our next meeting. So but
Title.
let's
Yes.
go through it to
Title
just look at any other.
300 That site plan review in case you want to see it.
We will vote on Article 12 the next meeting, but let's go through the rest of it with any other thoughts we have about it. So I see something highlighted in yellow here.
Where are we?
It's one of
Yeah,
those.
Oh, I highlighted things that are going to be difficult to defend.
Yeah.
If you say this unduly exhausts natural resources, what are you talking about?
I don't know where
Um,
that came from, but I agree. It's
I don't
hard
think-
to even consider as a part of a site plan review.
I don't think we ever use it. I think in our boilerplate decisions, we just pass over it that article, subsection 2 has been complied with. I don't really think we've.
It's sort of covered in one,
All right, well then let's take that out.
Okay.
Everybody on board with that?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
And,
I mean, that's our usual criteria that we apply, and I guess it works, but.
and then this, so then we highlighted natural qualities of the town. I'm not sure how to describe that.
Yeah, get that out of there.
The character of the town, I don't know what you mean by natural qualities. Yeah.
Can you go down on that to that again?
If it's
I mean,
gonna,
it's so that
I
it
leave it-
fits, right? It's we want it to fit and not conflict with whatever we think the town is.
Right.
Character is probably a better word.
Character?
Suitable development compatible with its context, I think, but that might not be quite clear. But, you know, I mean, in my practice, I try to design buildings that fit, right? That fit their site and their neighbors.
But this is not a building design. This is a site design.
Well, for site plan, I know, but that the placement of buildings and circulation is
Okay, well, you do
Yes.
say it
with
constitutes
its
a suitable
context,
development, which is vague, but
right?
and will not result in significant detriment to the neighborhood or the
So and
rural
and
part, the town.
that's
the-
borrowing from special permit language,
Mhm.
right? The
Well,
significant
detriment to the
detriment to the neighborhood.
But the rest is not.
Yeah,
Well, you know, you could take out, well, it says significant detriment to a neighborhood, which is very localized, and then or the town is a broader. I mean, you don't
Just
need the
take
word,
out
you don't
natural
need the word
qualities.
natural qualities, just
Right.
significant detriment to the neighborhood or the town.
Or the
period.
town. Okay, all right.
I mean, site plan review
Makes
is
sense.
a fuzzy concept to begin with.
Yeah.
State law doesn't help it at all, but.
No, no. I mean,
And-
it's really designed to make sure everything is working properly on the site, whether it's, you know, drainage or vehicular access or,
And when we get to large home review, that's essentially a residential site plan review, and it's a horror show, so, but we'll get to that someday. All right, anything further beyond this
I
section?
think in terms of changes, wanted to emphasize that the written approval of the site plan with the findings will be submitted, and the 3 options for, you know, whether it's
Yeah, do we have anything here or want to put anything in here about the appeal? There is no appeal process.
there's no appeal process, and that's what I wanted to mention. There's mentions in here, an appeal process, which I took out.
Yeah, okay.
Primarily because there is no direct appeal of this kind of thing to the
Yeah.
courts.
There used to be, yeah, there used to be some reference to chapter 240 or something.
Yeah, and that's gone. And so the way it normally works is, it's ridiculous, but one has to actually apply for a building permit and get denied because you don't have an approved site plan. And that goes to the ZBA. And then the ZBA decides, I guess, yes, you need a site plan, or yes, the planning board was right. I've never quite understood why the SJC came up with that proposal, but that's the way it is. And then ultimately that decision goes to the court from the ZBA, not directly from the planning board. You could try and keep in, it can be appealed directly to
No.
Superior Land
No.
Court, but yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Is
You
this
can't
the
really-
last section of Article 12?
Is this what?
Are we at the end of Article 12 here?
This is at the end of Article 12, yes.
You
So
mean-
basically
I
we'll
had,
have-
yeah, I had suggested a section mentioning waivers. Only because, and it's in my time on the planning board, it's been one attorney more than any else, but thinks we can just waive things.
No,
And
you can't.
I
waive
think we should have, I know, and I think we should just have an express statement to that effect in the bylaw that doesn't exist at the moment. So that we don't have to explain it to people all the time, but
Oh,
I don't know.
A general statement about the planning.
Yeah,
board.
I had drafted something, I don't know, but I just think it would be helpful if there was to just preclude that argument from ever being made to us again, because we get it all the time.
Well, the language comes from attorneys who do comprehensive permits. It's a 40B term of zoning relief requests called waivers. That's in the comprehensive
Comprehensive
permit
permit.
language.
Right.
So that's where it's coming from. It's still applied, of course, but
Yeah. Well, anyway, if you would, Judge Keller, before we vote on the text for next week, take a look at what I suggested.
Could we put in something like in granting a special permit or site plan approval under this bylaw? the special permit granting authority will not have the power to grant waivers. Something,
However you want to word it.
all right,
Mine is too wordy, but I always do too wordy. So
okay.
would that help you, Lauren? I suppose, when you get people in the office inquiring about this, that, can't they waive this? Can't they waive that?
Right. I don't see how it wouldn't be helpful, it says it right there then.
All right. All right, to move us along, is everybody okay with everything that's been suggested for Article 12? With the understanding that we'll vote on it next week after we review some suggested changes to the site plan review part of it. Everybody okay with it? Everything else though?
Yep.
Yeah, just make sure that the drafts gets distributed to the committee.
The final.
Yeah, I think Judge Cutler, maybe it'd be helpful to just resend this Article 12 thing as a new separate email, so
Okay,
we
All
don't get, we're buried in enough.
okay.
Let me just make a note.
Okay.
All right, what time is it? 8 o'clock? Let's try to knock one other thing out since we're only gonna have one meeting in December. So Article 3, which is the article that sets up our districts and our zoning map. I don't think either one of us had I did certainly, my draft didn't have any substantive changes to that. I'm sure the map's gonna have to be updated at some point.
I think that's important when we do this, that we have all the updated maps and the names of the maps.
Yeah, I don't know how we do our zoning maps and how often we update it, but we'll.
Yeah, but we should have.
The only changes I suggested was in renaming and consolidating our commercial districts on 3A and creating an overlay district to prepare for multifamily development and whatever we do with the MBTA thing. And then in the harbor, it's long been an objective to consolidate everything that's down there that's commercial into one district, not to have, we still have a remnant of downtown business down there. We have waterfront business, we have light industry at the end of Parker Ave.
It still might be a heavier lift for people to understand that
I
consolidation.
think that is a real simple one, and
But-
we ran the
But the light
idea.
industry is the confusing one.
Yeah, we ran it all at the forum, and I didn't hear any outrage about it, that it makes sense, but another thing about that is that it would, the overlay district would go, and then this committee still has to decide as a matter of policy. My suggestion is, rather than calling it waterfront business, we call it a harbor district. And do we extend mixed use further throughout the harbor district? That's the policy issue. We
Yeah,
won't
I
need
think that's the controversial part.
right, and we don't need, and we didn't get, and I will say at the forum, I don't think we got a clear consensus, other than there were some people who wished we could repeal the permit we gave to the hotel. I don't think
Right.
people are greatly happy that we have expensive condominiums coming to the harbor, but
But there's really only two parcels in play at this point. The Trendowitz Marina that's in light industrial,
yeah,
and
which includes a
the
town
former
property.
boatyard lobster pound site. Those are really the
Yeah.
only one. Everything else is either town owned or done.
Well, no, then there's still the commercial buildings at the end of Elm Street, the high 90s to like 101 Elm Street. That also happens to lie in the overlay. So that little
Yep.
short gray building there is right now in the overlay and can be developed as a mixed use. So,
Yep.
but so the question is, without any, I don't think either one of us, Judge Cutler and myself, had any substantive changes to the language of Article 3, but do we in this step right now change the districts?
Well, if you change the
Oh.
districts and you're creating a new district,
I think it's a heavy lift.
changing the use table, you're gonna be changing the dimensional table.
Yeah.
'Cause this new district
All
has to be added in.
Then we'll do it then.
I'll be
Then we'll
done.
do,
I just
All
want to
right.
say on this one
yeah,
quickly,
go ahead.
from the forum, it was mentioned by a couple parties of when we're talking about it potentially extending the overlay district, that they did not want to see the harbor walled off with condominiums so
Yeah.
that, you know, the public usage, aesthetics, the sight lines, that kind of thing. So that was brought up by a couple of different people. So whether we agree with that or not is a different story, but that was brought up at the forum. And so I know
Yep.
for the people either watching
Right.
this meeting or at home,
Right.
that their concerns were heard. So, yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I want to
you're
remind, I want to
absolutely right.
remind everyone that when we put together the overlay district for the Cove area and for that particular project, we were very mindful on the floor of town meeting that we weren't talking about the whole harbor. And this was a test case to see if it could be expanded or whether the town had the will for it to be expanded.
Well, we might get the answer for that when the final project is built
When it's
down
done
there.
and everyone's like-
When it's done, and then everybody's
Right.
we'll
Could
see what the
be.
reaction is. That
Yeah.
might direct us to which way it goes for the
Exactly,
extension.
and
of
that's
that,
the
yeah.
right time, I
Yeah.
think, to
Yeah.
let that play out,
Yeah.
not now.
So, yeah, all right. So when we discuss Article 4 and the uses, we will be getting into what uses we want to allow in the harbor. We are going to get into what uses we are going to perhaps add to 3A regarding mixed use or multifamily. So yeah, we'll defer that, and then understanding that we will probably then have to amend Article 3 further, but
Because you have to change the name of the district. So
yeah, we don't, yeah, because, but like in 3A, we have highway business, we have technology business, which is really devoted to one site, it's already built. You know, again, I'm not a big believer in that we need all these multitudes of districts, but we'll deal with that further. So on the assumption that Article 3, as you're proposing, is essentially unchanged.
Well, I'm going to submit it to you tomorrow. I will be done with it. And
Okay, all
I
right.
can
Well, we'll
change-
take that up. We'll take that up real quick at the next meeting. too.
Yeah, that should be
All
fairly
right.
simple. And I'll also be sending Article 8 in case you want to be able to get to that, and I will send the site. plan.
Right, okay.
And in the
So,
meantime-
the other thing, by the way, about the harbor is that there is one commercial property, the Legion, that is still in a residential district. I think that's another policy decision, is do we put it in a commercial district to ungrandfather it? You know, and then the other thing about the harbor is, I think we've come to a consensus that the Oaks Estate would stay residential, but what do you do with the yacht club? And what do you do with the Bellarmine? The Bellarmine house is residential as well, but yes.
Well, the yacht club's just existing non-conforming.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I'm not advocating either of those properties be put into a harbor district, but the yacht club is one we'd have to address. You know, but the yacht club's a
you don't
grandfather.
have to address it. It's
No,
gonna
we
be
don't
existing
have to. No, we
non-conforming.
don't have. We don't have to. You're right, Lauren. I'm
It
sorry.
has been since the 50s.
Yeah.
You, Tom, you had mentioned the Legion being a commercial use. That property is owned by the town and that's leased by the Legion, if that includes the decision. It's municipal building.
But it is a commercial use, and I mean, it's just when the working group had discussed it before, we tossed around, you know, are we bringing all commercial uses into a commercial harbor district?
If it's possible to easily make things more conforming, you know, then fine.
Yeah.
If it feels like we're going to turn ourselves into a pretzel to do it, then maybe not. But
Yeah.
but yeah, no, the Legion, I would, yeah, like I said, if it's an easy lift to do, to just bring them in, especially because they're on the edge of that district.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do
I
it and
think
just make it conforming. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other one that the town owns, the Lightkeepers residence, I think Government Island is split up into 3 districts, and I think it's open space, residential, and then waterfront business. And, you know, the Lighthouse Keepers residence has a commercial use and it has a rental residential use. So, you know, we should decide to what we do with that property. Because again, the goal was to try to minimize the polyglot of zoning that we have down.
Yeah.
All right, so for purposes of tonight, what else?
One more thing. Can I just
Yeah.
point out to people, when you're looking through the draft of Article 12 again, do take a look at the provisions concerning minor changes to the site plan approval. I reworded it and I'm not exactly sure whether it works for you and whether it still reflects what's there to your satisfaction. So I would like you to just take a look at that.
Clark, refresh my memory. Is there a place in our, Clark and Lauren can go through it. Is there a place in the current bylaw where we make the distinction between major and minor
Don't
modifications?
describe what they are. You allow the building inspector to determine whether they're minor. And I don't think that's a useful thing to do.
All right,
It's for
well,
building
We did
inspector
that, yeah.
in that position.
All right, well, Judge Cutler, would you mind if there's something from another town that addresses that?
We could put it into
We
our
we could add
definition.
that in because that always comes up as well. I mean,
Yeah.
Lauren and I just had a discussion with a guy about a modification and, you know, is it minor, is it major? And, well, he had a slightly different issue too, but it, you know, he could have tried to split hairs with us if it was minor or major, but I think we should have a written distinction in the bylaw. about that.
Yeah, I think, let's see. Yeah, we need to describe what a minor change consists of.
And I think, you know, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong in my assumption. I think the assumption was not to create more work for the planning board or the zoning board, but I think we'd want to err on the side of any changes get reviewed.
Well, what I put in to modify what you had was I said minor changes to the approved site plan may be submitted to the building inspector for approval. And after the site plan has been approved, the building inspector may approve changes to the site plan that he determines to be insignificant or minor in nature or effect. All other changes may be submitted to the planning board. But again, I think that puts the building inspector in a very difficult position, and it creates potential conflict between the planning board and the building inspector as to what's minor or not.
Yeah.
So we may want to, as you say, if you know of a town that has something like that, I would glad to take a look at it. I can try and look
Yeah,
around.
I don't know.
myself.
Lauren or Cassandra, if anything pops in your head about it. The other thing though, minor and major modifications comes up with people who get special permits who a year down the road want to change something. So that how we make that distinction needs to apply to special permits as well as site plans.
Yeah.
Because it does come up and you want to avoid conflict and you want to avoid the situation where you have, I'm not suggesting anything, but you know, I have experienced in my career lax building inspectors. You don't want things sliding out of, you know, under the radar that we should, you know, the boards in the town should actually be looking at. So if we can all maybe put our heads together and find something somebody else has that fits our needs.
And if you don't do it in this, you could possibly cover it in your site plan regulations as to what you'd be.
Yeah, but again, I think it also applies to our special permit decisions because we'll get that too.
And
You know, we'll get it too. So,
Yeah.
And I don't know, by the way, does the village bylaw special permits speak to minor and major modifications?
Good question.
I don't know
I
that
don't believe so, but
Modifications
I
of
don't know if
what,
it's
Tom?
put in-
It would be special permit. It's still.
Yeah,
would
no,
be
but I'm
special
wondering
permit.
when that particular bylaw got written for the special permit special for the village, did we not put in a paragraph about major and minor modifications? Because maybe we could just borrow that if we did. I thought I read it somewhere in our bylaw and it might be that it's just specific to the village at the moment. But,
It references
anyway,
reliefs, Tom.
what's that?
It references reliefs.
Yeah, all right, well, we'll all take a look at it, and
Yeah.
again, when we're voting on Article 12, we'll want to include something about that.
Okay, all
All
right.
right. So, all right, I just want to. So are you proposing any changes to Article 6, the signs?
I'm going to put in some language that indicates that any time that one of the regulations specifies a particular message, it's not intended to, you know, be exclusive, and that any non-commercial message could be substituted.
Okay. All right, so hopefully the next meeting we can get that aside. I'm gonna put the alternate energy committee on a rush to review now that we're changing the game plan. But we might not deal with articles 19 and 20 until our first meeting in January. And what else do we have? Oh, and so at the next meeting, we will deal with finishing up 12, Article 8, Article 3, and Article 6.
Article 6, okay.
And, you know, we have to tackle these definitions sooner rather than later. So I think everybody on this subcommittee should look at them, be existing. You can look at what I proposed if you want. And let's identify the critical ones that need to be amended. Height is certainly the lead candidate that we've been talking about for 2 years. There was an attempt to do street or way, I don't know. We got to make sure structure is in line with what we want. We got to make sure that gross floor area and FAR, floor area ratio, are in line with what we want. What inside the building are we measuring? Are we excluding certain attic space? Are we excluding basement space? Are we excluding garage space or not? So let's focus at least on those, but also go through the existing list. If there's things that can clearly be deleted, let's get rid of them now. If there's other things we do not have that you think we need immediately, that Clark and I and the planning board or somebody from the zoning board that they're confronting on a regular basis, let's do it. And we'll start at least at the end of our meeting on the 19th, hopefully, to get into the definitions. So it's a lot of material to prepare.
And that meeting is on the,
I believe it's the 19th, ladies. Yeah, which is
Yes, I
Monday.
believe that's right.
it's a Monday. All right.
okay.
All right, is everybody in agreement with that going forward? And anybody have any objection to what change there is to the Springtown meeting plan of action?
No.
Okay, we'll continue. We'll then deal with,
We'll try and get the least.
yeah, so then in the fall,
That would be an enlargement.
in the fall, we are looking at the use table, Article 4, Article 5. We need some more data for one of the Article 5 things. We're going to be looking at parking. We're going to be looking at the single lot exemption and probably any new initiatives we bring forward on the environment. So that'll be our thing for the fall, and then finishing it up with however we choose to reorganize this amount. All right, planning board will have some work to do with regulations, which we'll get on. We'll work on the design thing, and thank you for who volunteered tonight. And if there's nothing else about the bylaw itself, the only thing we have is to approve the minutes of our last meeting. So does anybody else have any comments, any questions for Judge Cutler?
And I might just say, if you're going through them, you happen to be sleepless and reading through them again and say, oh, I should have mentioned this, please let Tom know so he can let me know.
Yeah. All right. And
Sounds
yeah,
good.
and then obviously if there's going to be new drafts of things, obviously the quicker soonest before the 19th as possible for everybody.
Thank you for your clear-eyed efforts.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, thank you for participating. Oh my gosh, this is very productive. Thank you.
No, and I thank you for your call this afternoon, and I think we straightened a lot of things out, and I'm glad that we have. So, all right, the minutes of November 9th. I'm sure everybody read them right away. Can I have a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Second, someone?
I'll
Second.
second, yeah.
Okay. All in favor? Alphabetical roll call.
Clark Brewer, aye.
I'm Callahan, aye.
David Farag, aye.
Cass Malatesta, aye.
All right, that's passed. Thank you very much. We'll see everybody on the Monday for our forum.
Motion to adjourn.
Clark, wear a tie. And yes, motion to adjourn second, please. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good luck
Thank
on
you.
your,
Good night.
good night.
Good night.